Welcome. I'm Samuel Jordan, your host for this edition of Media Watch on Hunger and Poverty. Today, with our special guests, Rob Robinson and Cheryl Berger, whom I'll introduce a little more completely in a moment, but we're going to talk about an issue that will affect so many in our communities here in D.C., Maryland, and Virginia. That is the proposal by Exelon Corporation of Illinois to acquire PEPCO. And I want to ask our guests, Rob Robinson and Cheryl Berger, who are among the area's most focused energy utility monitors, why does this acquisition, why does this proposal by Exelon Corporation make sense? What's the business sense of it? Why is it profitable for either company? How is that going to work? Rob, what do you think?
Well, Sam, fundamentally what we're dealing with is a deal where the Exelon Corporation of Chicago, Illinois, which is the largest nuclear power generator in the United States, is proposing to purchase. It's not a merger, it's a takeover or an acquisition of PEPCO Holdings Incorporated. If this happens, Exelon will go from just being the largest nuclear power generator to the largest distributor of energy in the United States. And that concerns us a great deal because it's going to produce far less competition for energy in the Mid-Atlantic region. And we're very concerned about that. For those of us in the renewable energy community in Washington, D.C., it means that there is going to be a great emphasis on making it very difficult, if not impossible, for people that already produce their own electricity through renewable energy to continue to do so.
Rob and Cheryl, I want to sort of drill down on that question. I want to hear more specifically, if, as you have mentioned, Rob, that Exelon is the country's largest nuclear power plant owner and operator, and PEPCO is a rather middling utility in manner of speaking, why does it make sense for Exelon, with its power, its billions, to acquire a much smaller company, regulated, it's not a merchant company, but I want you to explain that difference as well. But why does it make sense for Exelon to acquire PEPCO?
Well, Sam, that's a great question. Nuclear power now, in comparison to things like natural gas and renewables, is very, very expensive. Most of Exelon's 26 reactors and generation plants are over 30 years old, so they're getting very, very expensive. So Exelon, which has this huge investment in selling its nuclear power to consumers at the highest price, is faced with a business which is having trouble selling that power. So by buying wires-only distribution companies like PEPCO, which operates in D.C., Maryland, Delaware, and southern New Jersey, it has some transmission here in Virginia, but no customers. So by buying into utility distribution, what's called the regulated market, they have a cash cow in hand, and that's going to help them tremendously.
Cheryl, is that how we're going to address this issue, that perhaps Exelon has sought to acquire and has proposed to acquire PEPCO because they can shift their losses to our company?
Well, Exelon is in the business of making money, just like PEPCO. However, it's at the taxpayers that will not benefit by this because it is a bad deal. The resources are coming in from the taxpayer. It is not a good deal. And it's going into PEPCO and then on to Exelon. PEPCO will no longer be a local utility company.
So as we're looking at it then from your perspectives on this, Exelon, a nuclear company, and the nuclear industry itself is not doing very well. In fact, there's no new nuclear power plant built in the United States for the last 35 to 40 years. It's unsafe in addition. We've seen what happened in Fukushima. It is exceptionally dangerous, 3 Mile Island. We can repeat Chernobyl. So we know that this is not the safest approach to energy, even though they say that it is not fossil fuels and is relatively clean. But with the nuclear industry suffering great weaknesses now, in fact, they've lost money over this past few years. I want you to talk about that as well. But with the regulated companies, they seek rate increases almost on an annual basis, and that's a steady stream of income. So is that the play for Exelon, and how can the district's customers, these ratepayers, challenge this process?
Well, that's a good point, Sam. Actually, Exelon owns 3 Mile Island now, but the way the deal breaks down is that they're paying almost $7 billion for PEPCO and PEPCO's holdings, and that includes a $1.2 to $2.5 billion premium. In other words, they're paying more than PEPCO is worth, and that $1.5 to $2.5 billion premium is going to be divided between PEPCO shareholders and the executives that brought the deal. In exchange for that, Exelon gets PEPCO's shareholders to go away altogether. They take over all of the assets, all of the distribution throughout the PEPCO region, and they get us. We basically get sold to them. And the deal for ratepayers in Washington, D.C., in Maryland, and Delaware, and New Jersey is that we get about $100, $114, and we get sold to Exelon.
Now, Cheryl, if this is the game, that is, Exelon has a few sweeteners. It will give a ton of money to its shareholders, acquire PEPCO, and toss out a few gum bags to D.C., Maryland, and Delaware, New Jersey subscribers. Is this a good deal? I mean, what happens here with these sweeteners? What will D.C. consumers get and gain from this merger?
Well, as I understand it, the benefit to us as individuals, if this merger goes through, is that we will get approximately $142. $142, a one-time payment to those of us who are taxpayers in the District of Columbia. I don't think that that's a good deal. The other thing is that the rate increases are going to continue. It's been proven that this is not a good deal, and that I want to point out who really is going to be affected by this.
Good.
It's going to be low-income people, it's going to be middle-class people, and it's going to be actually all of us are going to experience increases over the next 10 years or more. And we're already spending an exorbitant amount of money to pay for electricity on a monthly basis. If you are also a senior or an elder person living in the District of Columbia, your utility costs are expeditiously, over a period of time, is tremendous. And people are not going to be able to stay in their homes because of the utility cost increases. Exelon has not proven to us that they're going to lower the bills. And so we don't really believe they're acting in the best interest of seniors, low-income people, or the ratepayers as a whole.
Now, you know, I've seen just recently, for example, a few studies and a few responses to this proposal by Exelon to acquire PEPCO. But there are a number of fairly credible organizations, Rob, who have stated clearly that they don't think, for example, the American Antitrust Institute among them, the IEA, and you can indicate who they are, but they've said this is not worth pursuing, and in fact, it could be, it could put the district customers at risk.
Yes.
Who are some of these authorities, and what have they said?
Well, the International Energy, Economic, and Financial Analysis Institute found that the deal does not benefit ratepayers whatsoever. And the American Antitrust Institute also found that the impact of Exelon combining with PEPCO is going to be, will have the impact of reducing competition enormously. PEPCO owns not just generation, but they own transmission and distribution assets. They own the utilities in Chicago and in Philadelphia and in Baltimore. And they want to add DC to that. In Baltimore, since Exelon acquired them in 2012, there have been 4 rate increases. In DC, there have also been 4 rate increases, but that goes back to 2010. So we don't see that slowing down in any way, shape, or form. But what's worse is that because Exelon owns huge power generation assets and transmission assets, they're going to be able to manipulate the wholesale cost of energy, which is about 70% of what we pay on our electric bill. And that's just not a good thing for anybody.
Well, now, we have our neighbors to the north in Baltimore who were getting their service from Constellation, which owned Baltimore Gas and Electric. Sure. And they have been complaining, in fact, alerting us to the possibilities of additional costs should PEPCO be acquired by Exelon. But we also know that it's made it difficult for the regulators to understand just what and how to govern and regulate a company that's so large and would be so much larger with the acquisition of PEPCO in this area.
Yeah, this is an article from the Chicago Tribune from earlier in the month, and it points out how Exelon has been able to go directly to the state legislature and levy put a bill in place that, if it is passed, will mean that all ratepayers in Illinois will be paying dollars more every month to bail out Exelon's failed nuclear plants. At the same time, they have another bill in the state of Illinois which will assign new charges to solar producers. And one of the things that Cheryl and I and the DC Sun Company have been doing throughout Washington, D.C. is opening access to solar, net metering and virtual net metering, which means that homeowners or even renters and small business people can invest in solar arrays and receive credit for 100% of the energy that they produce. Exelon is not opposed to renewables, they're opposed to consumers getting full credit for renewables because they're in the business of selling their power to us. So this is just one of the ways in which Exelon's merger with PEPCO, so-called merger, will basically render them unregulated. They won't be able to be regulated by our local public service commissions.
Well, Rob, I want to make this clear, and Cheryl, chime in on this too, and let me make sure this is clear to our audience. And that is, solar users in DC, for example, through DC Sun that Rob has mentioned, co-ops that build and equip their homes with solar arrays.
Yes.
Now, they want a system that permits them to use the energy that they need and sell the excess to the grid. But as I understand it...
Well, they don't sell it back to the grid. They simply get credit for excess production, but they don't sell it. They're not in the business of making power to sell it.
But that credit they get is at current retail prices.
That's correct.
For electrical. Now, Exelon wants to make certain that even if they could meter it properly, that credit would be at some wholesale price.
That's correct.
And that deprives those solar panel owners who've equipped their homes with solar arrays, it doesn't let them recoup their investment in the same time frame as they had planned.
That's correct. And for community solar, which are solar arrays which are built to allow people like renters and small business invest in them, that will render them virtually unfinanceable if they're not credited at the full rate.
Well, how do we, and Cheryl, what is the path now for members of the community, in addition to the solar users and co-ops and programs like DC Sun, how do they weigh in on this issue? Where do they go? What is the time frame now, and how can we be effective?
Well, we all should let the Public Service Commission know that we're in opposition of this acquisition, and attend the hearings. One will, Chris Crane will testify this coming Monday. We need to fill the room with people who oppose the acquisition.
Chris Crane is Exelon's CEO.
And what room are we speaking of? When on Monday and where?
The DC Public Service Commission hearing room is at 1333 H Street Northwest on the 7th floor. That's 1333 H Street Northwest on the 7th floor, and the evidentiary hearings begin at 10 o'clock in the morning, and they will run through April the 8th.
Do we have any way to anticipate how our own commission is leaning in this matter?
The only thing I would add to that, Sam, or to qualify that, is that since 2010, our Public Service Commission has approved every single rate increase requested by PEPCO. And since PEPCO became a holding company in 2001, between 2001 and 2013, the cost of our electricity went up by 61% in DC, compared with a 38% cost of living increase. The number of employees employed by PEPCO system-wide went from 2,800 to fewer than 1,400. In fact, today, there are only about 103 DC residents that are employed by PEPCO. For low-income families, they are now 3 times as likely as others to be disconnected. And in 2010, PEPCO's reliability ranking was in the bottom quartile when measured against all other U.S. municipalities.
Well, you know, we need to be able to study this issue. And Cheryl, tell me how your group, that is
Grid 2.0 and DC Sun.
Right, Grid 2.0 and DC Sun. What is the method here? Can people simply call out to you and get involved or support, or are you guiding them to other ways in which to weigh in on this problem?
Certainly, they can go online to grid2.0.org, and also there is DC Sun at dcsun.com. And send us a message, and we will, or go directly to the Public Service Commission.
Right. We have a coalition of organizations in DC at powerdc.org, which you can reference. But if you want to weigh in with the Public Service Commission and tell them why you think that this deal is not good for you as a ratepayer, you can write to PSC-Commission Secretary at dc.gov. Again, that's PSC-Commission Secretary at dc.gov.
Well, before we move from this topic, I want to make certain that our audience understands one other issue that has become prominent in this question of the acquisition, and that is this matter of reliability. You know, back in 2012, customers of PEPCO, many suffered outages of service up to a week. Why does this deal, will it make any difference whatsoever, or is that just more smoke from the planners of the acquisition? Cheryl?
Well, that's a very good question, because that's the beginning of how we got involved here. I had a brother who was in a health care facility and doing the derecho, and in that area of town that the electricity went out for more than a week. And so I decided, and Rob and I decided, to go out and check to find out what was going on. When we got there, there were 2 huge Metro buses outside, and patients, most of them elderly, disabled, amputees, waiting on the sideline to get onto the bus as a cooling unit. So we looked at each other and said, this is not supposed to happen.
Cooling unit.
Cooling units where disabled people were getting on to be cooled.
It was 100 degrees, over 100 degrees that day.
So that's how we got into this business. And as we continue to work towards helping others, then we became solar customers. We became the energy producers. And as a result of that, we have a cause, because we feel that the people in the District of Columbia need a new grid, a new way of producing energy. It does not have to be what it is now, and it can be better.
So even though Exelon has a solar farm, has wind farms, it does experiment in renewables, but it is at the same time sort of impeding the regulatory and statutory process here in the district that makes that a worthwhile venture for DC customers.
Yes,
Let's speak to that.
They want to sell it to us. They don't want it to make it for ourselves. And that's what the solar movement in DC has done, is to create a number of bills that enable people to connect to the grid, to produce their own electricity, and to finance it. And since that's happened, since 2009, the cost of going solar in DC has gone from $8 a watt installed down to below $3 a watt.
Affordable.
Right. And what this whole merger question is really about is the problem that it straitjackets DC ratepayers into a system, it's called the cost recovery regulatory system, which means that the utilities can charge us more every year. They can go to the public service every year and say, we had to spend more money on the grid, therefore you have to charge, we can charge the ratepayers more and more money. That's a system from the 20th century when fuel was cheap, when the country was electrifying. Nowadays, the business should be using technology, efficiency, and renewables to make electricity cheaper.
We want to thank our guests, Rob Robinson, Cheryl Berger from Grid 2.0, for their work monitoring this acquisition proposal by Exelon to acquire PEPCO and in fact charge us a lot more money and retard the development of renewable energy sources, all for their own profiteering and to balance out their losses as the nation's largest nuclear power owner and operator. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Sam.
Thank you.
And in order to achieve 4 corporate goals. First, to cushion the collapse in profitability of Exelon's nuclear power portfolio, which has suffered 41% in profit losses between 2008 and 2013. By purchasing PEPCO, a regulated utility will yield guaranteed rates, including increases on an annual basis, a dependable income stream provided by PEPCO's customers, the ratepayers. 2, increase Exelon's economic and political power in regional and national energy market policy formulation. 3, to use its increased energy market dominance to suppress the growth of the renewable energy sector and any other sources of market competition. And 4, fat paychecks for Exelon and PEPCO executives. Thank you very much. I'm Samuel Jordan, Executive Director of Healthcare Now in Washington, D.C.
Are you ready now, ain't you? One more time. Yeah. Yeah. Come on. Come on. Come on. Going out to all my dogs over there on Chesapeake. Big Bud and all the fellas. Tailbone and all the rest of those fellas. We send them much love and respect.